have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 3581 and pursuant to House Resolution 539. I report the bill back to the House, amendment adopted to the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration the Bill H.R. 3581 and pursuant to House Resolution 539 reports the bill back to the House and with amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is on engrossment in the third reading of the bill. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Act of 1985 to increase transparency in federal budgeting and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I have a motion at the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman will suspend. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members will please take their conversations off the floor. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I have a motion at the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
In its current form, I am, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Walz of Minnesota moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 3581, to the Committee on the Budget with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Page 3, line 21, insert.
Is there an objection?
To the motion?
Without objection?
Without objection.
Can we dispense with the reading? Without objection?
Without objection.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to say the goals of this legislation that the gentleman and the supporters have put before us is noble. The supporters have stressed it's to improve accuracy on how we account for loan programs. That's indeed a laudable goal. As stewards of the taxpayer dollars, we all believe it's our responsibility to keep a careful eye on every dollar spent. This includes using the most accurate accounting measures possibly. Unfortunately, we have no insurances.
The House will be in order. The gentleman from Minnesota may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, the intentions of this bill are laudable. The problem we have is there's no insurance that the piece of legislation we're doing today will code that into law. Instead, what we have are half-finished ideas whose merit is disputed by nonpartisan budgeting experts and whose effects are still unknown. We've heard concerns today that enactment of this bill could result in systematically overestimating the cost of federal loan programs. This will not just be inaccurate accounting. It could cause significant harms to millions of Americans who depend on these loans. As a school teacher and a 24-year veteran of the National Guard, two groups that depend on these loans more than any other are students and our veterans. That's why I have this motion at the desk to amend the bill to ensure that at the very least, as this experiment plays out, that we hold harmless students and veterans. This amendment does not kill the bill. It changes nothing in it. It simply ensures until we know how this policy is going to work out, We won't insist that we make it any harder for an Iraq or Afghanistan veteran to get a home loan. At the same time, when economic hardships and rising tuition costs are making it harder for our best and brightest, those very students that we depend on to make this nation profitable, we need to make sure that they're not harmed by this process. My amendment would ensure that we hold them, the veterans and the students, harmless on how this unvetted, untested piece of legislation will work. I simply encourage my colleagues to join me, protect the students and the veterans in this. Go ahead and pass the bill if that's what you want to do, but let's make sure there's a firewall between those that can least afford to have this go bad. With that, I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Now I rise in opposition to the motion.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the prior amendment that this House just overwhelmingly voted down would have gutted the underlying bill entirely. This motion to recommit will now try to gut the bill by approximately 1/3. I commend the other side of the aisle for at least going in the right direction. But, Mr. Speaker, I remind us all of the words of the President of the United States when he stood in that same position, where he speaks of fairness in the agenda that he proposes, when he speaks of fairness the American public. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that the budget process in this country is broken. We know that there is no fairness in that. This amendment will undercut the legislation below us, and the underlying bill will try to restore it. We need fairness to the hardworking American taxpayer who, at the end of the day, will be the one who will have to foot the bill when the loans go sour, like we saw in the situation like Solyndra. We need to bring fairness to the small business owner who is already compelled to comply with the exact same requirements that we have in this bill. Mr. Speaker, we need to bring fairness to the American public who simply wants to know where their hard-working tax dollar is going. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, let me just say this. As we here in Washington travel through that gray twilight, which is that murky area of obscure accounting rules, let us commit ourselves to one thing, that we will bring clarity, that we will bring transparency, that we will bring sunshine, and most importantly, that we will bring fairness to the American public as to their spending of their tax dollars. I recommend that we vote no on this motion to recommit.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage. This will be a 15-minute vote.
This is the Democratic motion to recommit, a last chance to change the bill before final passage. The underlying bill is another one proposed by Republicans that would change the federal budgeting process. The bill would change the way that federal loans are calculated, requiring that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac be included in the federal budget. Earlier today, the House did pass a bill that creates a commission to recommend federal properties that could be sold or redeveloped to reduce costs to taxpayers, and that passed by a vote of 259 to 164. They also swore in a new member, Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon, Democrat who replaces David Wu, who resigned last summer. And Sue Myrick, Republican from North Carolina, today announced she will not run for a 10th term for her North Carolina seat. The Hill writes that she didn't cite a reason for her retirement, but said on her Facebook page that she had consulted with her family before deciding. So this is a 15-minute vote. During this vote, we're going to take you to a portion of the State Department briefing today where spokeswoman Victoria Nuland said that while the U.S. leaves no options off the table, she doesn't think that more arms in Syria is the answer. The U.S. closed its embassy in Syria on Monday and evacuated all diplomats amid the escalating violence there. We'll show you some of the State Department briefing as this vote continues.
The comments coming out of Syria in connection with Lavrov's meeting We've seen the press reporting. We obviously haven't heard from the Russians directly yet.
What's your opinion?
Well, we've seen some of this press reporting with regard to Assad making yet another proposal on new constitutional amendments, new elections, sounding an awful lot like proposals he's been making for months and months. Let me just say that with regard to Foreign Minister Lavrov's mission, the Secretary and the Department will obviously reserve judgment until the Secretary has a chance to consult with Foreign Minister Lavrov after he gets back to Moscow on his conclusions from the visit. We obviously owe him that, and that will happen. That said, with regard to this press reporting, you can understand that the international community as a whole would be pretty skeptical if, instead of focusing on ending the violence, what we seem to have is a re-upping of this same offer that Assad has been making for months and months and months, that he would, put forward some sort of constitutional referendum and have people vote on it. It sounds like another promise by the Assad regime to put forward a piece of paper that they control for a vote that they can control. And frankly, how that gets us to the kind of peaceful national dialogue about a democratic future for Syria that we all want to see is not very clear.
There are 2 points also that came out in the Syrian media. One is that that President Assad assures them that he fully supports the ending of violence wherever it comes from, and that the observer mission should continue and expand the team.
Well, if in fact Assad supports the end of violence, he knows what he can do today, which he has neglected to do for these 11 months. He can stop the attacks by his forces on innocents in cities across Syria, and the violence continues in Homs, in Hama, around the outskirts of Damascus, etc., as so many of you are now able to report.
Can I just ask a question on Syria as well? Given the limitations of diplomacy that were obvious at the United Nations at the weekend, and despite the strong rhetoric coming out of the administration, what is your government willing and able to do to actually change the situation in Syria?
Well, I think the Secretary spoke to this quite clearly in Sofia, and the President spoke to it last night. In the absence of being able to get the kind of action that so much of the world, Europeans, the Arab League, countries ranging from India to South Africa wanted to see the United Nations take, and it was unwilling to take, unable to take because of the double veto. We want to support those Syrians who want a peaceful democratic process. What is that going to involve? As the Secretary said in Sofia, it's going to involve, first and foremost, working with as many countries as we can to strengthen regional sanctions, strengthen unilateral sanctions against the Assad regime, to squeeze the money that he gets to continue to fuel his war machine. We're going to work with countries around the world to call out those who are still sending him weapons and expose that. We're talking, as we said yesterday, as the Secretary said in Sofia, about working together as the friends of a democratic Syria to support the democratic movement, to help them to plot a way forward, and also to do what we can about the humanitarian situation. It's frankly not clear how much we're going to be able to do, but we want to help.
But however much the United States squeezes, if Russia and China are still doing business with the government in Damascus, it's not going to make any difference, is it?
Well, we've made absolutely clear how we feel, both bilaterally and publicly, about regimes that continue to trade arms with the Syrian government. They're simply fueling the violence.
You're trying to shame the Russians into stopping their current policy.
We have made absolutely clear that we think that this is wrong, that it's dangerous, that it's fueling the cycle of violence. Now, I would disagree with you that the question of sanctions isn't an important one. We've already seen the Syrian regime increasingly squeezed. It's starting to run through national reserves that are better spent on the good of the people to fuel its weapons. It is having a harder and harder time trading with countries around the world. So the sanctions are having an effect, and we'll continue to use them.
Final one, if I may. Senator John McCain yet again this morning called for the United States to help arm the rebels, the insurgents against the Assad government. Have you ruled that out?
Well, we never take anything off the table. The President doesn't. However, as the President himself made absolutely clear, and as the Secretary has continued to say, we don't think more arms into Syria is the answer. We think the answer is to get to a national democratic dialogue, for the violence to stop, for the regime's tanks to come out of the cities, and then for monitors to be able to go back in.
But they were the answer in Libya, weren't they?
Libya was a completely different situation. Please.
Also, one more on that, please. The humanitarian corridors, the idea of humanitarian corridors or safe zones, would the U.S. support that idea?
That is not the stage that we are at the moment. We are trying to work as Friends of Syria to see what might be necessary. Frankly, Jill, some of these proposals that people are brooding about could not be done without foreign military intervention, which, again, as we have said, we don't think more arms into Syria is the right answer. Please.
Could you explain to us how the Friends of Syria would work? Is it a coalition? It is a group? How does it meet to have representatives of certain governments?
Saeed, we talked about this quite extensively yesterday. I can't, expand on that any further than to say that the idea here is to gather those countries who are interested in supporting a democratic Syria, many of whom made their views known in the UN, but there's also a broader group of them in the Arab League and in Europe, to work together to do what we can. And we are consulting now on how this might work. I think if you see some of the comments coming out of Arab League countries, some of the comments coming out of Turkey, some of the comments coming out of European leaders, we're all talking in the same vein about forming a group of friends who can do more together in the absence of being able to do more in the UN.
Yeah, my apology about the embassy. Maybe you addressed this before. But now with the embassy completely closed and the lights are shut off and so on, what happens to the local employees, the locally employed Syrians that worked at the embassy? Do they still have a job? Are they safe? Do you have any kind of guarantees to maintain their safety and security?
Well, the situation for the local employees is similar to the situation in other places where we've had to suspend operations, like in Libya. We continue to pay them. They stay in our employ. Generally, if the embassy itself is closed, they don't obviously show up to work, but we would expect that when that happy day comes that we can reopen, that they will be fully back to work, and in the meantime we make sure that they don't suffer economically.
How do you ensure their safety, that they are not subject to interrogation or even more severe measures by the Syrian government? Is there such a thing?
Well, obviously we have a number of ways to stay in touch with them, including through the Polish Protecting Power, but also through our direct contacts so that we can advocate for them if there are difficulties.
The embassy, the Syrian embassy in Washington, it continues to operate as normal, correct?
It does. They don't have an ambassador at present. They're under the management of a charge.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How do they, presumably there's sanctions on Syrian banks, right? So how do they get paid?
You'd have to ask them about that.
Well,
You mean
no,
about
how do
how
you
our
get the money
employees,
to them?
how our employees get paid?
Yeah.
I can take that question
Right.
if you want to know about
Sure.
that.
And then you mentioned some of these ideas that have been brooded about. Can you which ideas are you talking about?
Well, Jill was talking about corridors and things here.
Well, are you talking about what Anne-Marie Slaughter wrote about today?
I'm not talking to anybody's specific proposal. I'm
okay,
simply saying that some of the issues that Jill raised would raise a lot of questions about how one would do that.
Well, what was raised by the former policy planning director who also was very early in coming out for NATO intervention in Libya, was the idea of these zones or corridors that could be protected by Arab troops. Is that something that you're familiar with, or is that something that you were referring to when you were talking about these ideas that are percolating?
I have to admit I haven't read the piece yet, so let me do that.
Turkish Prime Minister has said today that Turkey will launch a new international initiative on Syria, and his foreign minister is coming to Washington tomorrow. Will you discuss this initiative with the Turkish?
Well, we always talk about Syria with Foreign Minister Davutoglu. As you know, the Secretary had a brief meeting with him also in Munich, and Syria was very much a topic, so I think we do look forward to hearing the ideas from the Turkish side going forward.
About this initiative?
Well, obviously they've been talking about it in public, so I would expect they'll also want to talk about it tomorrow.
One more thing, the Gulf states have decided today to expel Syrian envoys and record their own. How do you view this action?
Well, a number of countries are making decisions about their diplomatic presence. This, continues the trend that we've seen. We also understand that the British, the French, the Italians, the Belgians, and as you said, a number of GCC countries have, at a minimum, brought their ambassadors home for consultations. In some cases, they have the same kinds of security concerns we have, but in other cases, it's also linked to their dissatisfaction with what happened in the UN.
An update on Syria from today's State Department briefing. Back live on the House floor, this is a motion to recommit vote offered by the Democrats, Tim Walz of Minnesota. A last chance to change a bill that would change the budgeting process by altering the way costs of federal loans are calculated. It would also require the budgets of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac be included in the federal budget. Final passage vote will be next, and that will do it for recorded votes this afternoon on the House floor. Earlier today, the House welcomed new member, Suzanne Bonamici. They swore her in. She is the new representative from nearby Portland, Oregon. She takes the seat of David Wu, who resigned from Congress last August. Now the number in the House, 434, the only vacant seat, the Arizona 8th, which is Gabby Gifford's seat when she resigned, of course, a couple of weeks ago. Also announced today, Sue Myrick wouldn't be running for her seat. She's a 9-term congresswoman, a Republican from North Carolina. She made that announcement on her Facebook page earlier today. There's also news earlier today that former Senator Bob Kerrey said today that he would not make a comeback for the Senate in Nebraska. And many Democrats there had hoped he would run for the seat this year, but announcing this morning that he would not, as Ben Nelson is would be retiring this year, not running for a re-election in 2012 in Nebraska. On the issue of the election, several caucuses and primary going on today. Colorado and Minnesota Republicans are caucusing today. Missouri is holding its state primary. Republicans holding their primary there. We have coverage of speeches from Mitt Romney in Colorado, Rick Santorum in Missouri, and Ron Paul in Minnesota. We'll show you some of those speeches later this evening, beginning at about 10 or 10:30 Eastern here on C-SPAN.
190. The nays are 238. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion is agreed to.
On that, I ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman from Maryland has requested a recorded vote. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
This is a final passage vote on a bill that would change the way federal loans are calculated and require that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac be included in the federal budget. Meanwhile, over in the Senate, they're kind of in a holding pattern with possible work ahead on the transportation bill. They are in a period of general speeches up till at least 6 o'clock Eastern this evening. Congressional Quarterly writing this afternoon that Senate Republicans are balking at the latest modifications to the list of the proposed offsets for the transportation bill. They write that shortly before the panel was scheduled to convene for a markup, the Senate's second-ranking Republican John Kyle said that Finance Chairman Max Baucus's last-minute changes to the revenue package were not, quote, productive. So no moving ahead just yet in the Senate. In fact, the Senate won't be in tomorrow as Democrats are holding a retreat in Washington, so the Senate not in session. The House will be in session tomorrow. General speeches, morning hour at 10, legislative business at noon, and on Wednesday the House will consider a bill that grants the President line-item veto authority. The measure would allow the President to propose cuts to any spending bill he signs into law. The House and the Senate would then hold an expedited vote on the President's proposed cuts with no amendments allowed. That's expected to be on the House floor on Wednesday.
On this vote, the yeas are 245, the nays are 180. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
Clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 540, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 3521 to amend the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974 to provide for a legislative line item veto to expedite consideration of rescissions and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, under Rule 22, Clause 7C, I hereby announce my intention to offer a motion to instruct on H.R. 3630, the conference report to extend the payroll tax, unemployment insurance, and SGR payments for doctors. The text of the motion is, I move that the managers on the part of the House at the conference on the disagreeing votes of the two houses on the Senate amendments to the bill H.R. 3630 be instructed to file a conference report not later than February 17, 2012.
Notice will appear in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, I'm going to hang on to wait.
The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 2606 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 2606, a bill to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to allow the construction and operation of natural gas pipeline facilities in the Gateway National Recreation Area and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The Chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 658, an act to amend Title 49, United States Code, to authorize appropriations for the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal years 2011 through 2014 to streamline programs, create efficiencies, reduce waste, and improve aviation safety and capacity, to provide stable funding for the national aviation system and for other purposes.
The Chair will now entertain requests for one-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, religious civil liberty is a bedrock of a free people. But today we face an unprecedented and unconstitutional act of aggression against our religious liberty sponsored by the U.S. government. The President's health care edict forces Catholic organizations to choose between either violating their religious faith or not furnishing their employees with health care coverage. No government has the legal or moral right to harass any religion and make them violate their religious convictions, especially ours. After all, the Constitution prevents this type of government oppression against religion. That's why Catholics, Protestants, and Jews are united in their effort to stand up against the government act of tyranny. People came to this country to flee religious persecution. Now our own government is a villain to religion. But people of faith will not submit to a government war against religion. The holy line has been drawn by a coalition of all religions. The head of the Catholic League, Bill Donahue, said it best. This is going to be fought out with lawsuits, with court decisions, and I dare say maybe even in the streets. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Okay. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Professor Lewis Moore
for his long and distinguished career in the field of agriculture. For more than half a century of service, Lou will be retiring this year from Penn State, where most recently served as professor of agricultural economics. Lou has been at the forefront of promoting Pennsylvania agriculture. Most notably, Lou was instrumental in the implementation and the expansion of the PSU Agriculture Cooperative Extension, which helps citizens learn and connect with various agriculture research and services that Penn State's Department of Agriculture provides Commonwealth farmers. In 1955, Lou began his work as a marketing agent for Cooperative Extension in northwestern Pennsylvania and later for the entire Commonwealth. In 1973, he joined Penn State as a professor of agricultural economics, where he also helped expand the extension beyond Pennsylvania, working with foreign ministries of agriculture, farmers, universities, agribusinesses, and countries across the world. From his research and writings to his marketing and advocacy, Lou's contributions to the field of agriculture stand as a beacon to our state and our nation. Congratulations, Professor Moore, and we thank you for your service. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize 9 students from Arkansas's 1st District that I have the privilege to nominate to U.S. Service Academy. All of these students have demonstrated exceptional skills in the classroom. Not only are these young men brilliant students, they've also given much to their communities and deserve recognition. Jordan Reed from Cabot is active in Scouting, FFA, and Quiz Bowl. Weston White from Blytheville, Arkansas was elected Lieutenant Governor at Boys State and is active in FBLA. Sully Bigger from Walnut Ridge is on the track team participating across country. Clayton Carpenter from West Memphis, lettered in baseball and football, and was an academic all-conference player. Robert Raper from Colt is cadet in the Naval Junior ROTC unit, where he holds the position of Cadet Company Commander. Andrew Morgan from Mountain Home is a 2-time all-conference academic selection in football. Sean Gavin from Cabot is a member of the Air Force Junior ROTC, where he is a Cadet Lieutenant Colonel and Logistics Commander. Jack Baltz from Pocahontas is class president, an active church member. Daniel Kyle Payne from Violet Hill was selected for the American Christian Honor Society and serves on the Student Council. These young men are proof that America's greatest generation is not just a story of our nation's past. With each new generation of Americans, our national spirit is renewed. It's an honor to represent young men like these who embody the hope and purpose that define America. Yield back.
The gentlelady from Tennessee seek recognition.
To address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my
Without objection, gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's an interesting thing. There are programs around here that are completely out of control, and one is the Department of Energy Loan Guarantee Program that our Energy and Commerce Committee has been investigating for the past year. Well, I tell you, I was thinking about an old country song when we were talking about this program today, and it is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. And that is certainly what applies to the Department of Energy Loan Guarantee Program. And that is what DOE needs to do. We are seeking information to figure out exactly what has happened with the taxpayer money. Now, everybody's heard about Solyndra. We all know how that has run off the rails, went bankrupt, wasted taxpayer money, and now we have Fisker, which is a company that received federal loan guarantees. Right now, they're trying to renegotiate their terms of their initial loan, and guess what? Now we find out that they are laying off employees, 20 employees and 40 contractors. Yet again, another Department of Energy Loan Guarantee Program under the watch of Secretary Chu is having difficulties, and federal taxpayer money is being wasted. Yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of Alf Larson, a Minnesota World War II veteran who survived the infamous Bataan Death March. Alf passed away just last week on January 30th at the age of 93. Despite experiencing one of the worst aspects of war, Alf kept his faith in the Lord, and during his 41 months in captivity as a prisoner, Alf would read the New Testament and the Book of Psalms, which he kept hidden. After the war, Alf returned home, got married, and then re-enlisted in the Air Force in 1948. He left the Air Force 6 years later, came back to Crystal, Minnesota, and raised a family, his 3 children. And like most heroes, Alf insisted that he was just a regular guy doing his duty, saying, quote, "I'm not a hero, I was just doing my job." Mr. Speaker, last week Minnesota and our nation lost one of our greatest heroes. To Alf and all the other veterans who serve our country admirably, I want to say thank you and for your incredible sacrifice. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are there further requests for 1-minute speeches? What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Speaker, I do want to acknowledge today the honoring or the recognition of National Black HIV/AIDS Day and acknowledging the work that many organizations have done to stop the devastation of HIV/AIDS in certain populations. And we'll submit a statement into the record extensively acknowledging the work that has been accomplished. But I rise today to address a very important international issue that appears to be politicized by those running for president in the Republican primary. First of all, we should all be concerned by Americans who are being held by our ally Egypt. And we should be concerned for the safe passage of those Americans as quickly as possible. But it is ridiculous to associate this incident with the taking of hostages in Iran some decades ago. But of course, where there is foolery, there is opportunity. I call upon Egyptian Americans to work with this administration to stop the holding of American citizens and to have them released immediately. And I will continue pressing for this as the weeks and days go on. I yield back.
Ladies, time's expired. Are there further requests for 1-minute speeches? Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Nunley, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today begins the observation of National Marriage Week. It's a week that begins today, February 7th, will go through Valentine's Day, February 14th of next week. In fact, around the nation, in fact, indeed around the world, there are those organizations, individuals that will be conducting events around National Marriage Week. I think it's all too fitting and proper that we take this hour on the floor of the House of Representatives to recognize the importance of marriage, the importance of homes. And so tonight we will be having a series of speeches that will reflect the importance of marriage, of the home, and will also recognize National Marriage Week. Mr. Speaker, for the first of those speeches, I would like to recognize my friend, my colleague from Mississippi, Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Congressman Nunley, thank you for the opportunity to speak in behalf of National Marriage Week. What a special time that is to us, and I will also say what an inspiration you and your wife are to my wife and myself on the way that you live that marriage. But as we look and we see how our society is today and the prevalence of divorce, the breakdown of the family, I think it's very fitting that we talk for a moment about the importance of marriage and what it means in our lives. And while it is not attainable for some family situations or some situations, it should always be our goal to keep that family unit together and to hold that bedrock of our society together. You know, my experience with marriage came from watching my mom and dad. You know, my dad was a gunner in a B-17 in World War II. He came right after World War II to Columbus Air Force Base, which is in Congressman Nunley's district, and met my mother at a dance when she came down from Lackey, Mississippi, outside Aberdeen. And from that point forward, my dad decided he would move his allegiance from Oklahoma to the state of Mississippi. And I watched that marriage through my life. And while no marriage is always completely easy or trouble-free, you know, they stuck together through thick and thin. And I know for us, my dad, my late father being a petroleum engineer, that we transferred quite often. From kindergarten through the 12th grade, I was in 10 different schools in 4 different states. And we actually spent another summer in a 5th state. But Mississippi was always home. And that bond that we had was very special, because as long as Mom and Dad and my brother and I were together, you know, there was that protection, that safety that came from that. And how I watched them as they handled things that came up in their life inspired me. And then that last move that we had from the state of California back to Mississippi, I wound up in a high school in the 10th grade with a great friend of mine whose conduct and his behavior indirectly led me to accept Jesus Christ as my Savior at the end of my 10th grade year. He got me going to his church, and it was there that I spotted this beautiful young lady. And I had to wait until she broke up with this boyfriend, and then I moved in for the kill. And so I started dating my wife, Sydney, when she was 15 and I was 17. Sydney when she was 15 and I was 17. And we dated 5.5 years before we got married. We would have gotten married sooner, but we were afraid to stay by ourselves. So we had to wait just a little while. But we've now been married 32 years. And I can tell you that I can't imagine not being married to Sydney. And as I look and we talk about National Marriage Week, and you look at the joys and the troubles that you go through in life, and for us, part of that was having a son with special needs. Our son Livingston has Fragile X syndrome, and that difficulty of going through that with him is something I could have never done without that bond of marriage and that strength that came not only from the Lord, but from my relationship with my wife. And so we've been blessed with our son Livingston. What a wonderful son. And our daughter Maggie. And they really, having that family together and them having us together, I think helps us as we build our society and we move forward. And so I want to commend the gentleman from Mississippi for having this event today where we can come and speak on that. And I want you to know that I'm a very smart husband too, because I'm giving this speech wearing the tie that my wife gave me for Valentine's Day last year. So hopefully that will score points. But I want to say that as we look at this, let's try to encourage people that are going through difficulties in their marriage to stay together, to keep that family together. And this is something that we can build on that will benefit our society. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Now I'd like to call on my friend, Mr. Lambert, the gentleman from Colorado. Recognize you.
I request permission to address the House. Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Mississippi for putting this time together, and I rise today in support of National Marriage Week. In so many ways, from so many sources, marriage is under attack in America. When we consider the many social problems facing our country right now, the erosion of marriage and family is at the core of many of them. Scholar Michael Novak once famously referred to the family as the, quote, original Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, unquote, because of its role in providing for the needs of all its members and particularly the next generation. Study after study has shown the tremendous advantages for children and society as a whole when there is the sustained presence of mothers and fathers in the home. Families in which mothers and fathers strive together to nurture their children have advantages over every other family form that has been studied to date. Today, we are seeing that marriage is increasingly in trouble in America. High rates of divorce, non-marital childbearing, and single parenthood were once problems primarily associated with poor communities. Now, the American retreat from marriage is moving into the heart of the social order, the middle class. There is a widening gulf between the middle class, where a sharp decline in marriage is at work, and the most educated and affluent Americans, where marriage indicators are either stable or even improving. As unwed childbearing continues to climb, risking continued social breakdown and increased government dependency, national leaders should be encouraging stable family formation, not redefining marriage. I call upon Congress to recognize the intrinsic good that results to all of society when husbands and wives strive to uphold their marriage vows and to raise children in loving and stable homes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Mississippi for putting this time together on such an important issue, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamborn. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
I thank the gentleman for hosting this time. This is a conversation at the end of the day, after all the votes are over here on the House floor and all the hustle and bustle and everything, and we had a chance just to shut down and be able to talk about issues like this week being National Marriage Week. Just for a moment to be able to pause on an area that we really do agree on as a Congress and so many people can gather around. To celebrate marriage, what marriage has been in our own families, what it means in our nation. 20 years ago, this May, I watched my bride walk in with her wedding dress, and I could never begin to explain the emotion of that. It's a moment I will never forget, seeing her smile and thinking for the rest of my life, I'm going to get to spend it with that lady. Love is an amazing thing, but marriage is not just love, it is commitment. It is the foundation of our culture. It is the very essence of what we call family. For me, as a follower of Jesus Christ, I also understand that marriage is one of the few things to survive the fall of man. Marriage existed in the Garden of Eden, and it still exists today. And while I fully appreciate and understand the dynamics of single parenting, growing up in a single-parent home myself, I watched my mom dedicate her life to myself and my brother, and how hard she worked. But I can tell you from her perspective and from no person I've ever met, have they picked up a newborn child and they've looked in that newborn's face and said, I hope this child grows, gets great grades, goes to a good college, gets married, and then gets divorced. No one does that, because as a culture we understand the value of marriage. It's intrinsic within us that we get it, and we honor that. We see an elderly couple in the park and see them smiling at each other, and we wonder about how many decades they've spent together, and we honor them as a culture because they have strived for so many years and been committed for so many years to each other. And it is to be honored. And it's a good thing for us to stop in just a moment in the hustle of this day and to honor marriage again. But let me just say, as a government as well, marriage is a big deal to us because there's a direct proportion. The weaker our families are, the more government has to stand up and provide services. The stronger our families are, the less there is a need for government. You'll see it in law enforcement, you'll see it in social services, you'll see it in food stamps, on and on and on. The stronger our families are, the less government we need. And as our families collapse, we have an acceleration of government to try to fit in the gaps. It is this uniting aspect of our culture. White, black, Latino, Asian, American Indian, every race, faith. Family is the key, and the marriage is the essence of that. Quick story. A few weeks ago at the Martin Luther King Day festivities in Oklahoma City, Paco Valderrama, who works the gang unit within Oklahoma City's police department, he's a fantastic officer with a terrific reputation in our community, stood up and he began to talk about marriage and about families. And he made a statement. He said, of all the gang arrests that they do and of all the gang interventions that they do in Oklahoma City, he said 1%
of the gang members that I pick up come from married, intact families. 1%. The more our families fall apart, the more government has to rise up. Intact families, you have a lower risk of drug use in those kids, of crime in those kids, of poverty, and passing on poverty to the next generation. They have safer homes with less abuse. They have less risk of early sexual activity, all because they become from a family that is married and committed to each other. We should maintain that in our federal policies, that in every way possible we support marriage, not discourage marriage. A great example of that is the marriage penalty that's in SSI right now. If you're on disability insurance and you're single, you get one payment. But if you're married, it's much lower. You're single, you can have one amount, and you can have one amount of assets, but if you're married, it's less. So it basically is a disincentive for a person on SSI to be married. I personally interacted with people in Oklahoma City that had been living together for years. And when I asked them about it and said, why don't you get married? Why don't you settle this commitment? His response to me was, I can't afford to do that. I'll lose part of my SSI benefits. We as a government should do everything we can to make sure there are no marriage penalties in any of our social service programs. Because the best thing that can be done to help pull families out of poverty is a stable, strong home. And when there's a stable, strong marriage, that will build up families. And the more we step in as a government and say, I know your family's falling apart, but we're just going to subsidize you. In fact, we'll subsidize you to a level that you don't have to get married. In fact, we discourage you from getting married. It's absurd on its face. The cultural thing that pulls us all together, every race, every religion, is the marriage being the center of that home. And for every family that I've ever talked with, the hope for their children is that they're married and they stay married. It is still a core foundation of our culture, as many marriages have fallen apart. But we should, as a nation, stand beside marriage. It's a great week. It's always a great week, though, to celebrate National Marriage Week. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to participate in National Marriage Week, along with my bride of 30 years, Tori. In fact, it was February the 13th, 1980, that she and I went out for the first time. And on that night, I found a friend that would be a life partner. A couple years later, we were married. Now, the purpose of National Marriage Week, as has been articulated here on the House floor tonight, is to recognize the benefits and the stability that strong marriages bring to society. Now, its purpose is not to belittle those that have never been married. Neither is its purpose to make those who may have previously been married feel like their value to America is somehow not important. I recognize tonight there are thousands of single parents struggling. They're struggling every day to make ends meet. They're trying to balance two tough full-time jobs. Jobs of being the sole breadwinner and provider to a family, and the full-time job of being a parent. But it's also important that we not forget to recognize the importance of strong marriages in our society. The home is the fundamental unit of society. The home is the system whereby values are transmitted from one generation to the next. Studies have shown that children raised in intact, married homes are more likely to attend college. They're physically and emotionally healthier. They're less likely to be physically or sexually abused. They're less likely to use drugs or alcohol. They're less likely to be involved in a teenage pregnancy. The home was the first institution established on earth. In fact, it's older than the institutions of religion, of government, or of education. The home is the only institution we have on earth that is exactly the same as it was before sin entered the earth. And today, we stand on the foundations of the homes created by our ancestors. And a strong America in the next century begins with strong homes today. Strong homes begin with strong marriages. I've known this to be true in my own life. While their story is not unique, in fact, it's a story that's replicated throughout America. Next week, there's a couple in Tupelo, Mississippi, that will celebrate their 55th wedding anniversary. They married as children in 1957. She was 17. He was an old man of 19. If their compatibility had been put into one of the matchmaking computer programs that is available today, and all their data had been input, those computers, I'm convinced, would have spit out a 3-word message. Are you kidding? He had lived all of his 19 years of life on a small and poor farm in Pontotoc County, Mississippi. He'd rarely traveled from the place of his birth. On the other hand, she was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She'd lived there until her family was transferred to Mississippi as she was to begin the 11th grade. The summer after she graduated from high school, they met. She canceled her plans to attend college because she'd met what would be her life partner. While their backgrounds had very little in common, their families shared 2 very important values: a strong faith in God and a commitment to the family unit. Their first night together, they got down on their knees and they committed their marriage to God, and they committed themselves to each other. Over the ensuing 55 years, they've shared many good days: the birth or adoption of 7 children, her graduation from college, an event that had been delayed by almost 2 decades, his becoming very successful in the life insurance business, including becoming the president of one of the state's largest and most successful life insurance companies, the birth of 14 grandchildren, seeing all 7 of their children given the opportunity to attain a college education. But just like in so many families, every day has not been a bright one. Trying to raise children while building a sales territory, there were a lot of times when there was not a lot of money left at the end of a long month. They've held hospitalized children, some hospitalized with routine childhood illnesses, others with life-threatening conditions, and they've had long nights in the hospital not knowing if that child would make it to see the morning. They've had to console a grieving daughter as she was consoling a son, a grieving daughter who was far too young to be a widow. They leaned on each other as he was terminated from the company that he built. He was the casualty of a corporate merger. Through the good days as well as the bad, the commitment they made to God, the commitment they made to each other has endured. And while the word retirement's not in their vocabulary, they're beginning their 8th decade on Earth, and they're beginning it each day with each other. And their 7 children are scattered from Knoxville to San Antonio, and each are contributing members of their communities. One of them lives in Mississippi, but works part-time in Washington, D.C. And tonight, he's proud to stand on the floor of the United States House of Representatives and on behalf of their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren, say thank you. Thank you for your commitment to each other. Because your commitment to each other, your commitment to your family, will not be measured by years, but rather it will be measured by generations. This story is not unique. In fact, it's representative of the millions of stories told by millions of families that have made America great. But as we stand here tonight, we need to be mindful that because the value of strong marriages bring to society, the policies of government should support strong marriages and not oppose them. And all too often, whether it's in tax policy, housing policy, policy of federal benefits, the policies of government are stacked against families. If we're to truly believe that families are the foundation of a strong America, we need to make the policies of government support and enhance those families. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, now let me recognize the gentleman from Texas.